listening to today's shir. Actually, it's not really much of a shir. I'm going to give more of a general outline of how to think about whether or not we can eat on fast, especially when working in the hospitals, as residents, as med students, as attendings. So I wanted to give more of a general outline. So as you can see, I provided this algorithm, which I don't know about everybody else here, but as med students, I've learned how to think like this, and I think it's a very easy way, convenient way to think about the issues and about when to fast and what is and how we can break our fast. The obvious problem with thinking in terms of algorithms is that there isn't a lot of room for subtleties. So inherent in the algorithm, because I made it so simple, I didn't really discuss other opinions, other options. I really try to keep it as straightforward as possible. So what I want to do first is I want to give a brief introduction about how to think about fast, and then we'll go through the algorithm itself to see how that actually applies in day-to-day life and at each every single one of these fasts. So in halacha, there are really three types of fasts. I think it's clear from the Mahatomos that there are three different types of fasts from the Psukim when that's relevant, and also when we think about them halachically. So those are Yom Kippur, which is obviously a deraisa. That's the most chomer fast. That is the most significant one. There's the Dalit HaNesim, the four fasts that commemorate the different tragedies that occurred around the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple, and what else resulted either leading up to it or subsequent to that. And Tainus Esther, which is really its own category. It's fundamentally different than the other two. So as I said, importantly, Yom Kippur is Midaraisa. The Dalit HaNesim, we have a pasuk in Zechariah, which is already in Tanakh, that mentions there are these four fasts, and Tainus Esther is from the Megillah. A very important distinction here is Yom Kippur has something to do with tshuva, right? It has nothing to do with commemorating a bad event. The Dalit HaNesim is obviously we're fasting because of horrible things that happened. And Tainus Esther is actually considered a happy fast. In halacha, the way that ends up manifesting itself is that in general, if for example, like this year, Tainus Esther, Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, so our two options is since we're not going to fast on Shabbos, our two options are either to fast on Thursday or to fast on Sunday. Since we don't want to uh, uh, do a fast earlier that commemorates tragedy earlier. We want to push off tragedy as much as we can. Al pi halacha, what we end up doing is pushing off the fast until Sunday, instead of doing it earlier, instead of doing it on Thursday. Tainus Esther, on the other hand, if for whatever reason Purim will be on Shabbos, so we'll do it earlier. We'll do Tainus Esther on Thursday so that we don't end up in a situation. So we don't end up in a situation where Purim ends up on Shabbos. But what that means is that Tainus Esther is actually happy. We don't mind doing Tainus Esther earlier because that's really leading up to commemorating a happy event where the Jews were able to kill out everybody that was trying to kill them. So that's how it manifests itself in halacha, and that is going to be a fundamental difference between these fasts, as we shall see. There's a machlokes between the Rambam and the Ramban about the four fasts. So the Dalit HaNesim, let's leave out Tisha B'Av. So the three out of those four, which are Tzom Gedalia, right after Rosh Hashanah, Asar B'Teves, and Shivasar B'Tammuz. Shivasar B'Tammuz, what we just did 2 weeks ago. So those three fasts all start in the morning instead of at night. As we know, by all Jewish holidays, we start by night. For some reason, these three only start in the morning. The Ramban says the reason why that is so is because, well, actually, it's really a Gemara, it's earlier. The reason why that is so is because there was a time where the Jews weren't really doing these fasts. At one point, we accepted as a kahal, as a communal responsibility, that all of us are going to fast these fasts. But when we accepted that, we had a couple of caveats. One of them being, we will only fast during the day. We're not going to fast the night before. The question then becomes, what happened to Tisha B'Av? Why is Tisha B'Av different? So the Ramban says that the reason why Tisha B'Av starts the night before is just whatever. It's an exception to that rule. It still is an optional fast. It is fundamentally the same category of fast as the other three, which means that there will be certain leniencies, as we shall see. But according to the Rambam, at least, He disagrees with the Ramban. He argues that Tisha B'Av starts at night because it's not optional. The other three fasts, those were optional. There was a debate: are they going to do Tzom Gedalia, Sarah B'Teves, Shos B'Tammuz? Are they not going to fast them? There was whatever. They weren't sure. At one point, they were considering it, not considering it. So in the end, they agreed to do it, but only do it during the day. But Tisha B'Av, by the fact that it starts the night before, and by the fact that we have the Chamish Inuim, um, the five I don't know what a good word in English is, but the five extra stringencies like we have a Yom Kippur, right? That we don't wash our face, for example, among other things. That symbolizes the fact that it's not actually optional. The next part of that then is the Ramban can argue, and at least the Rambam will agree with at least 3 out of the 4 fasts, is that since these 3 fasts are optional, we were able to accept it on our terms. So in addition to only agreeing to do those fasts during the day and not starting the night before, we also only accepted to do those fasts if you were not a chola. If you're a chola, and by chola here I mean chola she'ein bo sakana, right? Obviously, if you're a chola she'yesh bo sakana, and if you don't eat, you're going to die, then obviously you have to eat. And even on Yom Kippur, no question about it. If you're a chola if you're just a chola, as we call it in halacha, michus ve'alma, right? You just, let's say your tooth hurts you or something's just bothering you, then in that situation you still have to fast. But a chola she'ein bo sakana, something in a middle category where not eating won't kill you, but you're definitely considered sick. Let's say someone that suffers from migraine headaches. So that person would be considered a chola she'ein bo sakana, and he does not have to fast. Now, Rabbeinu Tam disagrees on the Ramban. The Rabbeinu Tam potentially says, at least it's a Machlokas Achronim, how exactly to learn the Machlokas, but Rabbeinu Tam potentially disagrees on the Ramban, and he might argue that doesn't apply. But bottom line, and most importantly, Shulchan Aruch actually passes like the Ramban. Shulchan Aruch passes that a Chol Hashem B'Sakana does not have to fast. The Ramah says it might be better to be machmir, but he's willing to be lenient. He says if you are lenient, you don't lose out anything by being lenient. It's okay. The Taz paskins, again, continuing on the same argument, the Taz paskins that Tisha B'Av is like Yom Kippur, in which case a Chol Hashem B'Sakana would have to fast. He wouldn't be allowed to break his fast. However, the Mishnah Berurah disagrees. Usually we tend to pass like the Mishnah Berurah, especially when the Taz is the other is the Bar Plukta, is the person arguing on him. So Mishnah Berurah passes so that Tisha B'Av has the same status as the other 4 fasts. So if you are a Chol She'ein bo sakana, according to the Mishnah Berurah, even on Tisha B'Av you don't have to fast. You're allowed to eat. Now, next question that comes is: let's say we agree that you do have to fast, or that you don't have to fast on Tisha B'Av. On Yom Kippur, when you don't have to fast, there's a concept called eating b'shiurim, which means if let's say you have to drink a certain amount of water in order to stay hydrated. So if possible, we want you to drink less than a shir. It's mali lugmav, which is about the size of a shot of scotch. So like one of those little plastic shot glasses. So on Yom Kippur there is such a concept that ideally, if possible, you should eat b'shiurim. Now, it's important to keep in mind that eating b'shiurim is still an issa d'oraisa. It's also mid'oraisa to drink something, even if you're just doing a little bit at a time. But there's no chiyuv kares on it, so you end up being in a better category. Meaning, what you're doing is still prohibited, but it's less prohibited than just drinking a full cup of water. But obviously, if you're a chol she'esh bo sakana, then if you can, do the shot glasses. If you can't, go all out. Question is, what happens on Tisha B'Av? On Tisha B'Av, do you have those same rules? So this is really dependent fundamentally on what we're discussing up until now, which is how do we think about Tisha B'Av? Do we think about Tisha B'Av like one of those other fasts? Or do we think about Tisha B'Av like it's Yom Kippur? Like it's really similar to Yom Kippur. It happens to not be a deraisa like Yom Kippur, but the rules of Tisha B'Av follow the Yom Kippur rules. So the Aruch HaShulchan very logically argues that there is no shiurim on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is one of the 4 tanesim. If you have to eat on Tisha B'Av, there's no reason to take one shot glass at a time. Go all out, take however much you want. Shlomo Zalman, however, disagrees, and he has an interesting distinction where he compares someone who's already ill and someone who's preventing himself from becoming ill. Meaning, if let's say I know that if I don't eat, I'm going to develop a migraine headache. I'm not really sure the pathophysiology of migraine headaches. I somehow don't think that it's related to food, but okay, fine. Let's just assume for purposes of this example that it is related to food. So if let's say I'm going to eat I don't eat anything, I will develop a migraine headache. And now, as someone who is still healthy, who has not yet developed that migraine headache, actually, so then let's say a diabetic. So a diabetic, if right now he's fine, but if he doesn't drink enough apple juice or whatever it is, make sure that he has keeps his blood sugar to a certain level. He is a cholesh. He's a cholesh b'sakana. It's even worse cholesh b'sakana. So on Tisha B'av, is there a reason why he should have to use shirim? So according to Shlomo Zalman, he makes this interesting distinction where he says that if you're currently fine, you're currently healthy, but you will become sick, then you should use shiurim. Meaning, on Tisha B'av, as a diabetic, I should be drinking apple juice in shot glasses. I shouldn't be drinking a full cup of apple juice when needed. But if I'm already ill, then there's no reason to do shiurim. Then, like just like one of these other four fasts, and then we go all out. The Rambam says that on Tanis Esther, even someone who just has, this is again pointing out the fact that Tanis Esther is fundamentally different than all the other fasts. It's a happy fast. So the Rambam says that Tanis Esther, even someone who just has a small toothache or whatever it is, just something's bothering him, he's allowed to break his fast. Tanis Esther is by far the most lenient of all the fast, and you can break. There's a much lower threshold that you have to pass in order to be able to eat. So now let's actually look at this algorithm. So as I mentioned before, I have to like algorithm. I think there's a very easy way to think about information. The obvious problem with an algorithm, though, is that it potentially oversimplifies. So we're going to try our best together with this part and the introduction of this year to hopefully give it a little bit more nuance. But in order to keep things as clear as possible, I want to specifically focus on the algorithm. So let's start at the beginning. Say you're not feeling well on a fast. Obviously, we'll have to define terms, figure out exactly what it means that you're not feeling well. But I think the most important thing is to first point out, before saying anything else, is the first point on this algorithm, which is don't be stupid. In other words, this is a good rule in life, a good rule in medicine, and a good rule in halacha. If you're treating patients and you see that you can't possibly take care of the patient anymore, you're not thinking straight, you have to have a drink. Again, within reason. And I don't think there's any real way for a rabbi to be able to, paskin this sort of question. So something you'd have to know for yourself. If you're really you're in the middle of taking care of patients and you realize that you're not thinking straight and that you're making mistakes, that patients, you're dealing with, you're in the ICU, you're in the ER, whatever it is, and you could potentially end up killing patients because of the fact that, I don't know, you don't have your cup of coffee, you don't have your cup of water. You do what you have to do. You're currently taking care of patients' lives. You could potentially end up making a fatal mistake. Do what you have to do. Like, this shear is not for you. Just, take care of it. Leaving that aside, okay, now we could actually talk about everything else. We could talk about what to do with in every other situation, how to think about fasting. So even though I mentioned in the introduction to this year that it's not really, the fasts aren't really separated into major and minor. There's more Yom Kippur, Dalat Asim, and Tanis Esther. I think for purposes of how to think about it in terms of halacha, it's a little bit easier to think about it in terms of major and minor fasts. So in our major category, I'm sure it's no surprise, we have Yom Kippur and Tisha B'av. So on Yom Kippur, it is very important to remember that all eating and drinking, even bishiurim, even taking just a small amount at a time, is an isser mid'oraisa. It's all biblically prohibited. You are not allowed to eat. You are not allowed to drink on Yom Kippur. Period. Now, obviously, there's always some nuance. So within the nuance, there is a difference between things that are actually have a bigger chiyuv and things that have a smaller chiyuv, but it's still all usr. So within our category, so now if you're a cholesh yesh sakana, so that means that if you don't eat, you will die. Say, for example, a patient who's severely dehydrated, a patient who is a diabetic. These people are all people that can potentially, if they don't eat, it could be fatal. So then, ideally, you'll eat mashirin. That is, you'll use a shot glasses. So, for example, the diabetic might be able to get away with only having a small bit of apple juice at a time. So that's perfect. That's what he should do. However, it's not always very practical. Again, we're trying to focus less on patients and more on healthcare workers. Actually, I remember that apparently Usher Weiss was asked this question, and Rice Sprung pointed out Rav Usher Weiss had originally told them to eat b'shiurim, but it was not practical, and that was during COVID, the physicians, the healthcare practitioners that were working in the ICU were there for a couple of hours at a time. They're wearing PPEs, and you get very, very thirsty wearing all of that. and you only get a small amount of time for breaks. So it's not very practical to eat b'shirim in that situation. Obviously, they have to eat and drink. Again, as we mentioned in the beginning of this year, don't be stupid. You have to take care of patients. You have to make sure you're able to take care of patients. These are life. This is a situation of a life-threatening situation. So in that, so for those practitioners, it's obvious that you don't use b'shirim. You do what you have to do in order to make sure that you're able to take care of those patients. We don't want you to get dehydrated, and we want you to be able to take care of them as best as you can. On Tisha B'av. Now, again, every other fast, it's in general, it's not even a question. If you're a chol sheyesh bo sakana, if it's a life-threatening situation, you do what you have to do. We already mentioned in Tisha B'av, there's debate if whether or not you should use b'shiurim or can you just drink however much you want at a time. But we could generally pass the Aruch HaShulchan is not a bad person to rely on. That once you're already in the situation of chola that can eat or drink, then you do what you have to do. So here I want to just differentiate between our Sephardi listeners and our Ashkenazi listeners. For Sephardim, we're going to differentiate here between there is no differentiation between the Dalit Tanesim or the other three fast and Tisha B'av. It's all the same thing, and therefore you can, it says follow through Tanesim, you can go over to the next category. For the Ashkenazi, the Ramah does say to be machmir. So if in that case, then we could then in general try even if you're a chola she'ein bo sakana, again, let's say you get migraine headaches, if you can avoid fasting, go for it. If you can't, then then you already the Rama himself is willing to be mego. But ideally, if you can, try to hold off on eating. Again, there is potentially one caveat in that, which is, for example, this year, where Tisha B'av is nidcha. Once Tisha B'av is nidcha, then we can already be a little bit more mekel. There's some more kulas on Tisha B'av. So then I think we can really start thinking about a Tisha B'av that was supposed to be on Shabbos and instead was on Sunday, like we have this year. Then you can already go back to follow three Tanesim, as we mentioned down here, and go into the next category. So let's move over there. In our minor fast category, again, I want to emphasize that we're not going to distinguish between not feeling well or we anticipate not feeling well. There's really no difference between the two. If let's say you don't eat, then you will get a migraine headache, or you currently have a migraine headache. Once we're within the realm of three tanesim, then within the minor fast, then I don't think it really matters one way or the other, and you can already start eating. You don't have to fast at all. So within the three Tanesim, and as we mentioned, sometimes according to Sfardim, Tisha B'av also fits into this category, and according to Ashkenazim, Nidcha Tisha B'av also falls into this category, and that is, in that case, the Chola She'ein bo sakana does not need to fast. So if, let's say, you develop migraine headaches on fast, you don't need to fast at all. Again, so you have to use your own judgment about what exactly is a chola she'ein bo sakana. Halachic terms are not exactly medical terms. I don't know how to define it precisely. But if you're just going to be slightly uncomfortable, or for example, you'll get a small caffeine headache because you didn't have a cup of coffee, that's probably not a chola she'ein bo sakana. This is again why the beginning of this year we're emphasizing don't be stupid. It's a judgment call. You really have to figure out for yourself how you feel, what sort of category you'd be in, and are you delivering? Is the fact that you're fasting impairing your ability to deliver healthcare? Now, for Tanya Esther, just Tanya Esther is the easiest one to be makel on, is the easiest one to be lenient on, but you also shouldn't, abuse that power. So, right, if you don't have a cup of coffee, you get a headache, should you break your fast at Tanya Esther? I mean, probably not. If it's bothering you a little bit more than a little bit, and again, I'm not using precise terms because there's really no way to use precise terms in these situations. So if it's bothering you more than that, then yeah, break your fast. But again, when you're thinking about it for yourself, the whole idea here is so that so that we all develop ideas about how to think about these issues in halacha and how to be able to decide for ourselves in the hospital where we don't necessarily have access to, or it's inconvenient to access a rabbi immediately. Just know Tanya Esther has the lowest threshold. You do what you have to do. It's not as big of a deal. But again, keep in mind it's still a fast. There's no reason to abuse that power.